Hi, everybody. We'll be getting started shortly. Hi, Dr. Achalonu. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So we have one additional panelist, but she is running late. So I think we can go ahead and get started if that's okay with you.
Sure. The struggle of residency that I no longer have to endure.
All right, so we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Sowing Seeds session entitled Failing, Making Your Setback a Comeback. My name is Esther, and I will be your panelist for tonight. And today we have Dr. Chidima Achalonu, who is the current chair and trustee for the postgraduate section of the NMA. She's a pediatric emergency medicine fellow at the Children's National Hospital, Washington, D.C. She completed her pediatric residency at the University of Chicago, where she also served as chief resident before transitioning to fellowship. She earned her medical degree from Morehouse School of Medicine, where she was actively involved in the Student National Medical Association and continues to work closely with the medical students through SNMA. Beyond her clinical fellowship, Dr. Achalonu serves as the communications chair for the section on minority health, equity, and inclusion for the AAP and is a current scholar for the Emergency Medical Service for Children program, where she is working to optimize best practices for utilizing security and law enforcement in emergency department spaces through a trauma informed lens. Prior to matriculating to medical school, Dr. Achalonu earned her Master of Public Health degree from George Washington University with a concentration in community oriented primary care, and afterward continued to work in the school health sector through health education, health promotion, and capacity building with Chicago, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Alexandria Public Schools. Dr. Achalonu is passionate about building and reinforcing a diverse physician pipeline and is excited to engage trainees and early career physicians in the work of the National Medical Association throughout her team. Throughout her term. So we can go ahead and begin with the first question. So, can you share a specific instance in your medical career where you faced a significant failure or setback, and how did it shape you?
What an interesting question, because is it just one that I'm allowed to give? Or can I actually acknowledge the fact that this process of getting to and through medical school and then even being a physician, there will always be points when you face setbacks. And I think that each challenge you face informs the way that you are then able to approach and experience any other difficulties that you face. So I'll answer the question actually by taking a step back to share a little bit about my story. I was really excited to be on this panel because I think that my experience even getting into medical school was chaotic, borderline traumatic. And I am always so humbled to just see where I have come, recognizing that when I was an undergrad, I was planning on going straight to medical school, took the MCATs junior year, actually got into medical school, but had a really rough senior year, just was balancing a lot of things and have all of my priorities and time management in order. And so my grades really suffered. And many people don't know that when you get accepted to school, whether it be medical school or undergrad, there's a provisional piece that says, your acceptance is contingent on your like continued appropriate performance, given that they have not seen your full academic record. And so the medical school that I was accepted to, actually, as they reviewed my fourth year grades, which, I mean, they like fell, but my overall GPA was not terribly horrific, but they did actually rescind my acceptance to medical school. So if we want to talk about setbacks, imagine being a senior in college, you just graduated, you're supposed to be moving to a new city, starting medical school, all the things are happening the way you plan. And then the week before your white coat ceremony, you get a phone call from the dean of admissions telling you that actually you will not be starting medical school. I got into more than one school actually, and I had already turned down my seat in all those schools. So here I am, like, not a plan, no backup plan. I got an apartment that I've already paid for that I got to move to. And so I actually spent the next essentially like 15 years trying to right that ship. It took me actually 8 years, 5 MCATs, a postgraduate program, and a master's in public health before I got back into medical school. So again, when we talk about this topic of turning your failures and your setbacks into like your testimony and using it to drive you, I just feel so intimately connected to this topic. So I think that in particular, it was the not being able to start medical school that shifted the whole way that I then approached getting into medical school, when I got to medical school, when I got to residency. Because in the interim, I did go and get my master's in public health, and it like restructured, honestly, the way that I thought about my role as a physician, what I wanted to do in medicine, and how I wanted to make my impact as a clinician. And then what I was able to do in that time between undergrad and medical school actually was much of what I was able to speak to when I was interviewing for residency, as the reasons and sort of the motivations for why I wanted to pursue pediatrics. So I will certainly share more of my journey along the way, but I think that to answer your question, like the biggest pivot point was being very young, having this very linear plan of what I thought was going to happen as far as going from undergrad to medical school, it not happening, and then needing to do a lot of trial and error to figure out exactly how I get back on track. And in the meantime, actually finding a new path that changed who I was, changed the way I practiced medicine, and has made me, frankly, a better physician today than I probably would have been if I had just gone straight through.
Thank you for sharing that. The next question is, how did you handle the emotional and professional aspect of that failure at the time?
Honestly, not well, not well at all. So I was 20, life was hard. And I think many of us probably, when we think about going to medical school, have been told maybe in previous spaces, like, oh, like you're really good in science or math, you should think about being a doctor, or you've got family members who are encouraging you. And so you've got like a little bit of confidence behind you saying, yeah, I can do these things. And so when you run up against reality actually telling you, okay, maybe you actually can't do these things, it's jarring, it's traumatic. So I will say that when I found out that I wasn't going to get into medical school, I transitioned to a post-bac program at the same institution that I was supposed to matriculate to for medical school. And I was like not in a good place. And I probably should have like maybe seen a therapist, done a little bit more emotional decompressing, and maybe not even gone straight into another academic program when all that happened. But again, you've got a plan and you're like, all right, let me just like run headfirst into this wall and try to break through this new wall that's been put in my way. And so honestly, I think because of that, I went through this special master's program that I was doing, and did all the work, got the grades, but there was a but then when it came down to interviewing for the medical school and being offered an interview, they actually never offered me an interview, even though I had chosen to do this post-bac program, because they basically told me that this was the best chance for me to get back into this particular medical school, and that what they wanted to see was that I could, perform like a competitive medical student, and that I could demonstrate a little bit more kind of social maturity of balancing social and extracurricular pieces with my academic responsibilities. So imagine doing all that, and then they're like, oh, actually, we're not going to interview you at all. And I reapplied to all the schools that I'd gotten into before, and none of them interviewed me except for one, who brought me into an interview basically to just destroy what little confidence I had left, to ask me why I even thought I should get back into medical school, why I turned them down the first time, to tell me how much my grades and my packet application looked so much worse than when I applied last time. And then literally 2 days after that horrible interview, they rejected me anyway. So I was not in a great place emotionally. I think I handled like that whole process really, really poorly. When I didn't get an interview to the school that I was at for the master's program, I think that broke like the very last string of me that was left. And so I was still, taking coursework, and I ended up failing my last two classes. So now it was, not only was I not in medical school, but I was not going to get this master's degree either. So I picked up all this extra debt to do this. It was supposed to help make my science GPA better, but I was in such a bad place emotionally that it was actually just making things worse. Um, so I ended up actually had to like retake a class over the summer and like retake one of the exams to remediate a class to a C, and finished a program where the requirement for the master's was to get a 3.0. And I finished this program with a 2.9 GPA. So I never even got the master's degree.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll try to tell you, like, this topic is my topic. Like, if you want to talk about going through the fire, this is what we are here to talk about today.
I feel like we're just getting started, but I really feel like your story is the true definition of resiliency.
Yeah.
And so with that, I do want to ask you, how did you maintain your motivation to even want to pursue medicine to begin with after all of these doors being closed? What made you say, no, this is still for me and I'm still going to pursue this? I mean, because you are successful today. So I guess
Thank
how
you
did
for
you
saying that. Sometimes you forget, but then when you were reading my bio, I was like, you know what, girl, you're doing some things a little bit. Like, you'll see me sound a little tiny. I had never entertained anything else. Like, I know it's very cliche, but I really was that kid at 5 saying that I wanted to be a doctor, and I never pivoted once from that. So I think part of it really was that I didn't know enough about me or like anything else that I could possibly do, and I had been working very unilaterally towards this goal for so long that I was like, ugh, we got to do it. Like, what is the plan B? There never was one. But then also, I felt like there's a reason why I had held on to this desire to be a doctor so long. So I just had to put my head down and work harder and try harder, which honestly, as now I reflect back on this journey, it really wasn't about working harder. It really was about working smarter. And so I was just like, you just keep trying. You keep trying. Eventually, it's going to happen. Like, people will see that all of these things are going to, fall into place. They'll understand sort of the nuances of what was going on senior year. But then each effort that was just like, I would get off an application cycle where I didn't get in any interviews anywhere, and then, immediately start applying again or like take the MCAT again. So it was 5 years, honestly, I've spent all my time studying for the MCAT, and applying to med school, studying for the MCAT, applying to med school. I was in the meantime, like, also working on my master's in public health. And so there was no other identity to me except for this person whose like whole life existed on the cycle of the med school application cycle. But then I had a friend who was not in medicine tell me that, like, I forget exactly how he framed it, but essentially it was just like, why not stop letting medical school, or moreover, like, not getting into medical school, define you? Like, stop letting it define you. Be like, you are a whole person and there's more to you than this particular chapter, but you're letting it be your entire story. And there is this TED talk from one of my favorite authors, Chimamanda Adichie, called The Danger of a Single Story. And I think that was like really understanding that there is more to my story than this person who didn't get into medical school, or who got into medical school, lost their admission, and had this whole like tumultuous, traumatic process trying to get into medical school. Like, there was more to me than that. And when I recognized that and just sort of took a beat and reset, things started moving the way they were supposed to. Because essentially I like applied back to back to back to back, year after year. It was like very expensive, very emotionally trying, very straining on my relationship with like my parents, who really wanted me to go to med school, and I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong, why everything was going amiss, and just like hard on me and my confidence and what I wanted to do. But then I like took some time where I actually just stopped applying to med school, um, came back a couple years later, took the MCATs, got the best score I'd ever gotten of all the 5 times I had taken it, and applied. And even with that, I'll be very honest with you, I only got 2 interviews to medical school. And I only got accepted to one school, but baby, one is all it takes. And
That's all you
Morehouse took
need.
a chance on me, and here we are.
That's awesome. So, during your journey, were there any key people or mentors who help you navigate that challenging time period?
Oh, so many, so many people that have helped me get to this point. Because sometimes, especially when things feel really dark and bleak, you need a village, whether it's mentors, teachers, parents, siblings, friends, people who can like actually be the ones to hold you up when you don't have the strength and tenacity to hold yourself up. And I don't think that I could have gotten here if I didn't have those people in my life really making sure that I was okay. And so when I was in high school, I did this research program that was run through Temple University at the time, where we did like graduate level research at different institutions across the country, and then also shadowed in the hospital. And so when I first ran into some of my challenges with getting into medical school, I reconnected with the guy who runs that program, and he was really helpful in like just honestly helping me grow up a little bit, and also kind of piecing through some of the uglier parts of the institution that is the medical application process. The institution that I was at, how it really didn't actually make any sense that I was applying so many times and not getting in, which then made me like, he pushed me to think about what's in my application. So like, the medical school application will tell you that you need to include a transcript from everywhere that you've done coursework, and that you need a letter of recommendation from everywhere that you've done coursework. But he was saying that, the only difference between when I applied for medical school and I got a bunch of interviews and got in, and then when I was applying for medical school and didn't get any interviews, was that letter of recommendation from the school that I wasn't able to get the master's from, which has to make you think that whatever they're putting in that letter could actually be damning you and not helping you. And he was right. The second I actually just stopped including a letter from that institution, I started getting interviews again.
Wow. Wow. So, during this challenging time, what do you think was the most important lesson you've learned from that experience?
I think the biggest thing is just that I can do hard things, and that my whole identity is not medicine. Like, being a doctor is part of who I am. Practicing medicine and being a pediatrician is part of who I am. And it's important to sort of the whole person that I am. But there are so many other things I am, right? Like, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, I'm a sister, I'm an aunt, I'm an advocate, I'm a community service member, I'm a Delta. Like, there are so many things that are important to me, people that are important to me. And when you put medicine and medical school sort of in the center of your universe, it can be very easy to forget that. And because I went through that, where I really did have to make a mind shift, when I then got into medical school and then got into residency, so those are 2 more challenge points that really will try to break your spirit if you let them. I never put, like, medical school was never at the center of who I was. It was something that I was doing, an important step in the overall goal. Like, the goal is not medical school, right? It wasn't getting into medical school. It's not graduating from medical school. The goal is being a doctor. So when I was in medical school, I was like, I don't necessarily need to kill myself to get straight A's, but I need to make sure I do well. But I also need to make sure I'm a well-rounded human, because well-rounded humans make good doctors. People who take tests well make bad doctors. And anyone who tells you differently is lying. And so similarly, when I got into residency, it was the same thing, that it was really important then for me to be well-rounded and continue defining myself by more than just the space or the point I was in my career.
Amen to that. And so, how has facing failure influenced your approach to your patient care as well as your teamwork?
Whew, that's a question. Let me tell you. Okay, so I'll say patient care first, in that I think in pediatrics in particular, but in all medicine, there is so much gray to how you take the science and the medicine that you've learned in school and you apply it to the patient in front of you and the person, more importantly, in front of you. And so I think not really having had a lot of like challenges or things that I had to deal with and navigate before everything happened with medical school, there was no real experience. Like no one sits down and teaches you, like, this is how you understand the grays of life. This is how you think about sort of the like economics and the racism and like all the things that play into the person on the other side of the conversation you're experiencing. So now, when I was working through trying to get into medical school, I was living in DC at the time, working on my master's in public health. And I was working full time while I was in grad school. I had an internship and like 3 part-time jobs just to make my ends meet. I didn't have a car. I was taking the bus and metro, like all through the city. And I personally, because this was before Obamacare, where you could stay on your parents' medical insurance till you're 26. So like I gotten kicked off my parents' medical insurance. So you really do find yourself in this piece like, is it groceries or is it the gym? I only have this much money to make these things happen. I know both of these things are important, but honestly, I can't do both of these things. Maybe I need to go get my teeth checked, but let's be clear. If somebody tells me I have a cavity, that cavity is going to have to sit there and fester because I don't know how many of you guys have dental insurance, but it's terrible. You got to pay for so many things out of pocket. So you do really start triaging your life, and you can't triage things that are supposed to be necessities. But then you become a doctor and you're having conversations with patients or with parents who are trying to explain to you why they didn't pick up this prescription or why they didn't come in as soon as they might for a patient. And it gives you a level of empathy that you might not have otherwise to really be able to work with families to find a solution that makes the most sense for them and to see them as people first and not judge their behaviors just on face value.
That's a great answer.
And then as far as teamwork, I think just the time and like the time between when I finished undergrad and started medical school, I did a bunch of things. I worked, I went to grad school. So now I've been in a bunch of spaces and places of people older than me, younger than me, Black, white, Latino, people from different countries. So the more people, personalities, and places you experience, the more data points you have to think about why a person might be doing this or what you can say to motivate someone to have kind of a shared goal to get things done, how you can be more collaborative, how you can problem solve, how you can resolve conflict. Because let me tell you, when you're in residency and you're on your 10th hour trapped in the resident workroom with a co-resident who is so irritating as a person, but y'all got to get work done, you have to find ways to be like to disagree without being disagreeable and to work toward a common goal, and like be friendly without being friends. So I think that all of those life experiences gave me a lot of maturity and a lot of new vantage points to apply to just teamwork in general.
Mm-hmm. And so in hindsight, because hindsight's always 2020, is there anything that you think you would have done differently during your comeback journey?
Yeah, so the biggest hindsight, and I tell pre-med students this all the time. Anyone who's an undergrad, we have like a bunch of scribes at the hospital I work at. Many of them are planning to go to med school, and I'm like, if you need someone to talk you out of going straight to medical school, I am your girl. So that's because I think the biggest thing in hindsight, I on purpose would have not gone straight to medical school. So part of the reason why my grade senior year slipped is because I was burning out. I was definitely, lighting the candle at both ends. I was like president of the NAACP. I was pledging Delta. I was doing all these things. I was an RA. I was a calc tutor, just doing. I was taking 16 credits, 18 credits. Like I've always been kind of that overachiever. But you start fraying at the end. You get very tired. And med school, like very much, medicine is a marathon, right? Not a sprint. And when you start sprinting through it, you can get like shin splints, you can get cramps. And so the biggest hindsight would have been like when I started feeling those signs of fatigue and burnout, to just on purpose actually not go straight through, take a year or two to regroup and then come back in it. I think the other thing was that when I was applying for medical school, I was applying for like MD, MPH programs. I always knew I wanted to get an MPH, but by accident, I ended up getting the MPH separate from the MD. And in hindsight, that was actually probably one of the best things I did for my career. So if you're thinking about a dual degree, I would actually do it very separately from medical school. Or if you're like a pre-med and thinking about wanting to go to medical school, but also wanting to do something in public health, I would actually go do the public health piece first. Because what that did for me is that public health is this huge, like massive bubble. And when you get your MD and your MPH together, medicine, people in medicine, like the medicine as a field, they're a little bit self-involved, where they think that like medicine is the globe, and then education and policy are kind of all the pieces that make medicine run. But actually, public health teaches you that it's the other way around. That there's this big like health issue, and medicine is just a small piece of the puzzle. And then there are other things that all have to work collaboratively with medicine in order that people be well.
And so, what strategies did you use to maintain resilience and confidence in the face of challenges? So I know you mentioned you had a friend who said to, alter your perspective, but in your opinion, what would you say?
Yeah, I think that in any way that you can, trying to like intentionally find time for yourself, like find times to figure out what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, both professionally and personally. So, if volunteering is something that you're really passionate about and that's the kind of things that excite you, while you're in medical school and while you're in residency, it's really important to actually make time to do those things, because it you'll have so many things that you actually don't want to do, and you get this new burst of energy and resilience and perspective when you're able to like even just a little bit of locus of control of your time to do something that you wanted to do on purpose that makes you happy, that fills your cup. So thinking really intentionally about the things that fill your cup would be the first thing I would say to do. Finding whatever outlets are important to you as well. So for me, working out is really important. So getting into like a good gym regimen was helpful for me, particularly in residency where the hours can be like really grueling. Therapy. That's the one, baby. So, I finally got to a point recognizing that if you if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And so when I matched for residency, I actually found a therapist in Chicago before I found an apartment in Chicago, because I knew that I wanted to make sure that like hitting the ground running, I had a good outlet for what I just anticipated I was going to experience moving to a new city, being in this new space and place of residency. I didn't even know that we were about to be in the middle of a global pandemic and being um, and being in the middle of a global pandemic while being a resident, which added nuance. But I was really glad that I already had a therapist and had like really made some intentional thoughts about my mental health before then.
Thank you for sharing that. Hi, Dr. Thompson. How are you?
Hi, sorry I'm late. Had a
That is
couple of a couple conflicting things going on.
that is okay. Thank you so much for joining us. So here we have Dr. Chantel Thompson, who is a resident in obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in Harrisburg. She was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and graduated from Hampton University, where she received her Bachelor of Science in Biology. Soon after, she returned to the city of brotherly love, where graduated from the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. As an advocate for cultural humility, social justice, and equity in medicine, she founded the PCOM Cultural Competency Program and PCOM Cultural Humility and Medicine Symposium, and served as the Student National Medical Association's 58th National President. With a passion for diversifying medicine and addressing health disparities in underserved populations, she plans to practice at the intersection of quality improvement and patient advocacy. So, Dr. Thompson, welcome. To begin, I would like to ask you to share your comeback story. So, can you share a particular instance in your medical career when you faced a significant failure or setback, and how did it shape you?
So, first of all, thank you everyone for having me. Again, apologies for being late. Um, my experience was unique because my setback happened pretty much at the end of medical school in my transition to residency process. So I actually did not match into residency the first time I applied. I applied for obstetrics and gynecology, which is what I had always dreamed to do, and felt that I had a strong application, and was really confident. And then I got the dreaded email that said that you did not match. So that really shook me, and it took a while for me to deal with all of the repercussions of that, not just obviously, trying to figure out what the SOAP process is and figuring out an alternative pathway to where I want it to be, but just also mentally, it can be really challenging when you have your certain goals in place and that doesn't work out. And then it can be really easy to be down on yourself. But I kind of created my own way out. I initially started as a transitional year resident and then ended up transferring into a preliminary OBGYN program that was a 1-year program, kind of partway through the my intern year, and ultimately ended up applying and matching into my current residency in obstetrics and gynecology. So obviously, having to go through a situation like that builds resilience. Unluckily, in a way that I would not have liked to have had that resilience experience, but it really allowed for me to learn different strategies for coping, strategies for recognizing when things don't work out your way. And now I feel like I'm much more equipped to deal with situations and understanding that not everything is going to work out the way that they're supposed to. Not everything is your fault. And even the things that may be your fault doesn't just because they happen that way doesn't mean that you can't fix them. And I think that that's is something that's just beneficial in life.
Thank you for sharing that. So how did you kind of already touched on this a bit, but how did you handle the emotional and professional aspect of that failure at the time?
That's a very good question. It was very hard. At the time when I didn't match, I was actually the SNMA national president. So there were kind of high expectations outside of my own high expectations that I felt were placed on me, not for anyone's fault. It's just, when you're in that position, people are watching, they want to know what's happening. Everyone's been on social media when it's match day, they're waiting to see where people match that. And knowing that I was not going to be able to make that post, and that the days leading up to that I was basically stressed out every single day, hoping that I can get an interview someplace at a random place that I knew nothing about just because they had an availability was really difficult. At the time, I hit like a really low point. I ended up having support people who were around. My school provided people for support. I had friends who were really supporting individuals within SNMA, both prior like board members and physicians who were extremely helpful. But I ended up, finding a therapist just to help me deal with the entire situation. And then basically continuing on after that, after the SOAP process is over, and trying to, answer the questions that my family had about, oh, so does this mean that you're not going to be an OBGYN? Why is it that you can't just reapply somewhere else? And, those things are kind of difficult. And then the experience of people go to AMEC, and when everyone goes to AMEC their 4th year, they want to walk into graduation, and like, what are they going to say when I try to walk across the stage? Like, transitional year, that's not really what people want to hear. So it was really challenging. But I think that what you have to do is understand your own limits, say yes to help, and actually reach out and seek help. I think that's something that people just have a hard time doing, is saying when they need help, especially I feel like as Black women. We like to feel like we can handle everything. But really recognizing where I needed that support, talking to people, figuring out different strategies to cope when I'm not having that great of a day, when I'm doubting myself, when I'm going like reapplying again, understanding where all of that is coming from, creating those strategies to figure that out, and then moving on. And also, I'm sorry, I am in, funny enough, like I said, I double booked myself. This probably sounds like you're hearing cows mooing. You are actually hearing cows mooing. I'm at a farm show. So, but yeah, it really just takes, it seems like it's a lot, but I feel like it is kind of simple. Seek help, take that help, keep going just one day at a time. Creating mantras was really helpful for me. And finding those support people, whether it's mentors that's doing what you want, or that are where you want to be. And mentors can be anyone. It doesn't have to be someone who, a Black woman who's an OBGYN. Like one of my best mentors was a white male who wasn't an OB-GYN, but they had also not matched back when they were applying to residency, and they were like an orthopedic surgeon at the time. So, finding those individuals who are going to help you through that process, and also just putting in the work, facing what caused your failure or your setback in the first place. In my case, part of it had to do with my step 2 score, so I knew that my step 3 score had to be strong. Reviewing, facing those hard truths, and moving forward from there.
Thank you so much for sharing. And so, with your setback that you experienced, what do you think was the most important lesson that you learned during that time?
Honestly, resilience. If that's something that you're going to need throughout your life, whether you have ever experienced a setback, or you floated through everything throughout life, um, resilience is so important as a physician, because you're not only going to be dealing with your own personal, life issues, but sometimes when it comes to patients, with colleagues, in your professional career, if you're trying to climb up the corporate ladder, or making those, having those goals in place. But also, in addition, just balancing out your regular life, you're going to have to build that resilience so that, number one, you can be there for your patients. Number two, so you can be there for your family and your friends. And number three, so you can be there for yourself. So really building that strength to withstand all of the challenges that can happen. I feel like it's something that's extremely valuable.
And so, with the resilience that you built or that you learned during that time, how has facing failure influenced your approach to your patient care as well as your teamwork skills?
Well, I'm still developing my patient care skills. I'm only a second year in residency. Well, in OBGYN residency, third year altogether. But it allows for you to have less anxiety. When you have that type of failure, you kind of develop this almost trauma from the experience that you had. And it makes it, initially, it can make it very difficult for you to try to pursue something again, because you begin second guessing yourself, and not being confident in yourself, and just losing sometimes who you thought you were, because something didn't work out. And building that resilience helps you to understand that it's okay, even if something doesn't work out the way that you want it to. It'll be okay. you know, you will find a way to get through it. Nothing is forever. When it comes to patient care, it teaches me to basically put my best foot forward for that patient. Because I mean, in those cases with your patient, it may not always work out if you make a mistake, you know. So you have to learn how to be more well-rounded in your approach to tackling those cases, and then also just understand. It also helps for you to connect with your patients, um, so that you can understand the struggles that they may be going through, based off of your own struggles. Like you kind of understand that we're all human. So when they aren't able to make it to their appointments, or they haven't been following their regimen, or they're down on themselves because they weren't able to lose the weight that they said that they wanted to, um, you can give them some advice that comes from a good place that will help for you to relate to them. And I think that sometimes that's what patients really want. It builds trust. Um, and yeah, overall, I find it to be helpful, at least personally.
Yeah. And so with that, I asked Dr. Achalonu a similar question. How did you maintain your motivation, right? In your case, it was a little bit different because you had graduated from medical school, but how did you maintain the motivation to say, I still want to pursue OBGYN?
So that was hard. The way that I so the way that I decided on going into OBGYN, it is the way that I decided to continue on that path. I decided OB-GYN by when I came into medical school. I wanted to pursue obstetrics and gynecology, but when I went into my third year, my mindset was to find something that was not OB-GYN that I liked more. So I was just comparing all of my experiences to that. When I got through all of fourth year, I realized that was it. I can't find anything else I like, so I went with OB-GYN. And so when I didn't match, the question is, maybe am I good enough for OB-GYN? Maybe I'm not good enough for it. Maybe I should consider something else. And through my transitional, the first part of my transitional year, I had the opportunity to, um, because of the way that it's built, to do internal medicine, to do general surgery, to do outpatient medicine as like family medicine. I even had a rotation in orthopedic surgery, which, no offense to ortho, it's just not my game. So I was able to kind of tap into all of those experiences and figure out what it's like to be a resident in each of those settings, what I liked, what I didn't like, and what I found fruitful to myself. And none of the experiences really stacked up to OB-GYN. And then when I was able to, I made the decision to transition into a primarily OB-GYN preliminary program. I found like a lot of happiness. And when I say where I say I found happiness, despite having to move to a whole nother state in the middle of the year and come into a program that's where the individuals there already knew each other, and to learn a new system and the stress that comes with that. Even though I was miserable, I was also really happy because I was doing what I wanted to do. So that really helped for me to continue my help with my own self motivation. And then also sometimes you just need to step out of yourself and what your current situation is, and remind yourself of why it is that you wanted to do it in the first place. And that's something that you can gain, like whether you have failed before, or just once you get into your practice, or even just as a medical student, when you've been up for 12 hours straight and you still have to do another set of questions, and like all you want to do is like quit. Sometimes it's good to remind yourself of why you're there. Your family is a very good source of that. I would call my sister and tell her about what I'm stressing out about, and she would remind me of why it was that I decided to go into medicine. Um, I am very close friends with my friends from high school who are all in like different careers and have had different life experiences, and being able to kind of step away and hang out with them was really helpful and valuable. Um, Reminding yourself that outside of you being a medical student or pre-med or a doctor, that you are a person, that you are not connected to your career, that you are separate from your career. That's just something that you do, and it's not necessarily who you are. And that helped me to like reset and um, reconsider all of the challenges that I had, and how much it affected me, and um, just realize what it was that I really wanted in my life, in my career.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing. And so, Dr. Thompson, in hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently during your comeback journey?
Honestly, this is going to sound funny. I would have been more consistent with taking my SSRIs. I was and I'm really open about this, and I think other people should be. When I realized like the challenges that I had, and started pursuing help with like my own mental health, it was one of those things that I wasn't always consistent with. Just taking care of my mental health outside of the holistic ways that you can take care of yourself. And um, I look back now that I'm more consistent with all of these things, I realize I didn't have to struggle as hard as I had if I would have just been consistent with taking care of myself. If I had been consistent with the routine, um, of, waking up, making my bed, taking a shower every day, taking my medications, working out, like all of those things, um, it really did change the way that I approach things. It basically strengthens you so that you can withstand all of the challenges that can happen. And I feel like now I handle some really big struggles, things that I probably would have broken down over, much better than I did before. So, if someone's telling you, you have a doctor and they're telling you you should take this medication and it's going to take 6 weeks for it to make effect and all other stuff, just do it. Just do it. And make sure you follow up with your appointments. They are there to help you.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, so now these questions will be directed towards the both of you. And so, what strategies do you use to maintain resilience and confidence in the face of challenges and adversity?
I think for me, part of it is really remembering where I've come. So, 10 years ago when I was working on applying for medical school, wanting to be a doctor and still trying to figure things out, everything seemed so bleak and you couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. So, anytime that you hit up against a road bump, sometimes it can be very helpful to just pause and think like, okay, one, you've done hard things before, and two, you got past those hard things. And today you are actually living in your answered prayers. Like this is what you were wishing for and working for. And so you're here, so in 10 years, you'll be looking back at this moment and thinking, oh, like, you thought it was going to defeat you, but you don't. I talked earlier about how like I would call it like my most pivotal failure was the whole getting into medical school, but let's keep it a buck. I failed step 2. I failed step 3 times. It took me a 4th try to pass step 3. I matched my 7th choice for residency, but I went to one of the most competitive PEDS residency programs in the country. I was a chief resident, and now I am doing one of the like more competitive pediatric subspecialties at the number 5 children's hospital in the country. So like perspective, I think, is everything as well. And then the other piece is just like spaces like this, I think actually help to build resiliency, because medicine has made us feel like you should be ashamed to talk about when you've struggled. But when you find those safe spaces and have those conversations, you realize some of the people that you are looking up to the most have been through it, baby, and they got to the other side. So when you're able to see that there are other people also who either faced similar challenges and can give you some guidance on how to get through it, or who at least can commiserate with you so that you know that it's not always because you did something wrong. Sometimes it really is that the system is fucked. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't curse, but sometimes it'd be like that. And we know that the system is also stacked against us. So there's like so many things that we're balancing. So when we continue to create spaces that welcomes the openness of talking about failure and struggle without shame, that can help build resiliency as well.
I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head with all of that. Um, it, I think one of the things that helped me the most was my relationship with SNMA and all of the individuals who were there. From the individuals who had matched the first time and then like their number one spot to the ones who were like, yeah, you know, I don't think people know this, but I actually really struggled too, and I had to go through, you know, I didn't match like twice and then I had to reapply and all of those things that you really have this kind of wealth of resources just within the organization itself, that all you need to do is ask and you shall receive, to be honest. Um, you know, I mentioned different mantras that were helpful for me. And it's almost like a version of cognitive behavioral therapy, is recognizing when you're um, feeling challenged and unmotivated, and finding those actions or sayings or habits that will help you to get out of that mindset. For me, it was mantras. That's kind of what I needed to remind myself. Um, like my favorite one was perfection is the enemy of the good, and it's obviously it's right there, right? Like everyone wants to be perfect, everyone wants to be the best, everyone that feels like they have to do everything a certain specific way, and when they don't do it that way, then they have completely failed, and there's no point in trying to do anything else. And that's not true. When you try to be perfect, you end up not completing things. You end up not helping anyone. You end up not helping yourself, and you find that you procrastinate more. You are inconsistent with your goals, and it just doesn't work out. At the end of the day, when you remind yourself, for me, I remind myself that I wanted to be an OBGYN because I wanted to take care of women who I feel like are so underserved just as a gender, number one, and then also taking care of patient populations who are overall underserved just by the medical community, number two. When I remind myself of that, I understand that it doesn't matter if I if I didn't match. It didn't matter if I didn't get a great board score the first time around, or if you know, it took me uh, 6 years to finish college, which is true for me. Um, my patient is happy. You know, when I walk into a room and there's a young Black woman who's there, they're happy that they have a Black doctor who's able to relate to them, and who will hopefully listen to what their concerns are and won't brush them off to the side. And so, you know, reassessing what the actual implications of what has happened to you is, and not um, thinking that you're just a failure just because it didn't happen perfectly. It's not, nothing's going to be perfect. So just those little things were helpful. And you know, of course, like I mentioned, your support system is everything. If you don't have a support system, build one. If you feel embarrassed about creating a support system, don't do that. Most of the people who are around you want to help you, and you are not a burden to them. They would rather you say that you are having trouble than to not. So, you know, say something, and lean on those people, because they will pull you through.
Thank you both for sharing. And so, how do you balance self accountability and self compassion after a misstep?
You got these questions, girl, man. You know, I think with the self accountability, there has to be any time that you run up against a challenge or you have an outcome that is not the outcome you were looking for. Uh, there has to be some level of reflection of what you can change, right? Because insanity is by definition doing the same thing and expecting different results. And so, particularly if you're going to pick yourself up and brush yourself off and try again, RIP Aaliyah, then you have to at least do some reflection to think about what are you going to do differently. So I think that's the self accountability part. But also, I think I mentioned this earlier, right? That there are some systems in place that make things challenging, and so no one can get through this process, med school, residency, fellowship, attendinghood, medicine, without learning how to give themselves grace. And it is learning how to give yourself grace that also teaches you how to make sure you give your patients grace. I think we tend to be a lot more empathetic to our patients than we are to ourselves, but it's important to take that and reflect it back on yourself. Because if you can't give yourself grace, then sometimes you are making things worse by just kind of like pummeling through, like putting your head down and trying to get through it is actually not always the best solution. So, maybe you've got this to-do list and you find yourself, it's been 3 or 4 days, and every day, 60% of what's on your to-do list is spilling over into the next day. Some of that might be that you're not being efficient with your time, but other parts might actually be that you are being too over ambitious with that to-do list. So maybe put fewer things on your to-do list. And then when you're able to cross off everything on your to-do list because you only have 40% of what was on there, now you've got the confidence to be able to keep going.
I mean, you're taking all my answers right now.
My bad. You can answer the next one first.
You're good. You're good. No, you're good. You're good. 100%. Like you have to give yourself grace. You have to be better. Be kinder to yourself because and don't take this personally. Every single one of us are probably, because of the nature of what we've decided to do with our lives, we're probably way harder on ourselves than we are on everyone else. And because of that, we beat ourselves up. We built these things that we do, these patterns of thinking that we feel have made us better students and better doctors, such as, saying that, oh, I can't believe I just did this question set and I got 70%. I should have gotten at least 90%. Like, oh, idiot, you got to study harder. And you're like, oh, well, that mindset is what pushed me to study harder. Like, no, all you're doing is beating up on yourself and making it much more challenging for you, and lowering your own self-esteem. So everything perfect, 100%. And also making sure you understand why it is that you do the things that you do and have created these patterns and habits that might be self-destructive, can help for you to reflect and reset those habits. I mentioned mental health. If that's therapy, like unlocking those things. And if you feel like you're not in a place where you want to seek out that, maybe start journaling. Figure out like why it is that you are over, like trying to overachieve on all of your tasks. Try to figure out why it is that you say these things to yourself when you something doesn't work out the way that you're supposed to. Once you can unlock that, you find more strategies to be able to, face your day and treat yourself better. Esther, that question was so good because it's one of those that's one of the challenges that I still have, as far as self, not just accountability, but just being confident in yourself, especially when you failed. It's so hard to feel confident in yourself, when you feel like you haven't achieved what you were supposed to. So it, it you just it's a really great question and a really great thing to answer. Honestly, I'm still learning. I think we can all probably say that we're still learning. There's ways that we can improve. But number one, recognizing when it's happening, what you are doing, what patterns you've created to send you into that shame spiral, and figuring out how to break out of it and creating habits that keep you from falling back in.
Thank you both. Those are very great and insightful answers. Because we're short on time, I want to try to lump two questions together, if that's okay. And so the first question is, what advice would you give to medical professionals or students dealing with failure for the first time? And second question is, how do you recommend speaking about things like poor exam performances or just certain failures that we have to talk about during interviews?
Chantel, you want to go first this time?
So I'll answer the second question first, about advice on like how to face it. So honestly, I think that I will tell you, as someone who's been on the, like, for the last 2 years, I've been on the other side um, of the rank list, and this is my first year where I actually was interviewing candidates. We want to see that you have had a failure, whether it's in residency, medical school. We want to see that you've done it, because we want to see how you were able to withstand it, and what you have learned from that experience. Many people will fail and will never face the fact that they failed, and because of that, they never learn the lessons on um, how to face those type of failures in the future, or build that resilience. If you can just be honest and say, the reason why I'll use my own example, the reason why I didn't graduate college is because for a couple of years, I essentially decided that I wanted to be, like, I don't know, a housewife, basically, instead of finishing up college. And I kind of got lost in that, and then decided to go back to school. And I was very young. I was very confused in what I wanted to do with myself. But what I was able to learn was that that wasn't a life that I wanted, and I knew I wanted more for myself, and to go from
I think we lost Dr. Thompson.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if it was my screen that was frozen or hers.
No.
Okay. I can maybe step in to answer a little bit while she resets her computer. So, honestly, I don't necessarily even think of setbacks as failure. Failure is such a finite word. And if it's not over, how can you say that you failed, right? Certainly you might have to pivot your goal. You may have had sort of a temporary or a first step or something you were trying to accomplish and you weren't able to do it. But as long as if there's an opportunity to do it again, or if there's another way to achieve the same goal, I wouldn't necessarily call it a failure. And I think that that's part of it. So being able to really reflect on the fact that I I had a plan in my mind, whether it was based on something or based on nothing, but I had a plan on my mind that this is what I was going to do. I didn't do it. Fine. The biggest thing though is that you don't necessarily need to reflect on, all right, this is all the stuff that happened in the past, but really more about this is what I learned about myself. This is maybe what I learned about the experience. And this is what I'm going to do differently next time. So when you're having these conversations, really what any employer or residency wants to know is how has it impacted you? Because again, I'm going to bring up this statement that insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So everyone expects you to run into difficult and challenging experiences. But what they want to see is that maybe if the first time you didn't handle it well, that you're able to learn from that and be more appropriate. I think, Dr. Thompson had mentioned that we want you to fail. We want you to have some level of difficulty and grittiness, because frankly, if you come all the way in through medical school and into residency and have never had really any sort of challenge or anything that's tested your resiliency, the first time that you have a patient that you care for who dies, or the first time that you have to tell a family that there's nothing more that you can do and that person, that patient is going to die, it will break you. Like, that is why people leave medicine. That is why they burn out, because that sort of like mental and physical fortitude was never refined. I think that like resiliency is a muscle, just like all the other muscles that we have to exercise. And so you have to think about experiences. You have to really like push yourself to grow on the other side of every experience. And then I think sometimes when you really do that introspection, you start realizing that I didn't achieve that goal. But then when I sat down and thought about it, that shouldn't have been the goal in the first place. So remember I said in hindsight, I would have actually not gone straight to medical school. So like, yeah, I didn't get in, like I got into medical school and I didn't go right away. But now as I sit here, I should have never wanted to go straight to medical school. I skipped the second grade. I graduated from college a week before my 21st birthday. I should have, like 20, starting med school, no baby. I should have spent some time like growing up a little bit, living, understanding the world, because it all plays into being a doctor, right? When I talked about how I didn't pass step 3 multiple times before actually finishing on my 4th try. The first time, the pandemic had hit. They actually closed all the Prometric centers. UWorld, who was the devil, didn't actually. They were the worst. I mean, basically for like all these residents, they said, okay, like we understand that you bought this subscription, and it's going to expire before Prometric opens back up. We'll give you a 2-week extension. Like, what's that going to do for me? I don't even have money to buy groceries, and you want me to drop another $400 in like 6 to 9 months? Who actually knows when Prometric is going to open, so I can get this Q bank again in order to pass this test. So I, planned to take it my first year, couldn't because of the pandemic, and our second year is aggressive. So even like having an idea of trying to take it second year, I just didn't want to keep pushing it back, and like the systems were weird with how much you would have to pay to keep pushing it back. But that was another thing that like now when I think about it, I should have just ate the money and picked a date that made sense, whether it was, all through second year, I'm actually just not going to take this test because my program is gracious enough that they don't give us, like, it just has to be done by the time you graduate, and then just do it on purpose third year, instead of doing it like trying to scramble when everything is going to hell and chaos, and then now not passing and letting that inform all the other times where now you're like psyching yourself out, even though the first time you never set yourself up for success in the first place. So I think that when you're able to share that with other people, they really respect that you've actually thought, oh, you know what? If I were, hindsight being 2020, I probably actually wouldn't do that again anyway. So I'm glad that that door closed, or that I wasn't able to do that, because that was not right for me. And I'm better for it, having not actually accomplished whatever I was trying to go for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Achalonu. We are over time, so I'm so sorry about that, but I think the time was well spent. So thank you so much for your time once again, and everyone, thank you for tuning in. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. So with that, I will call it a night. Have it a great night, and again, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I do want to just leave some parting words for people,
Please.
if they're still on, just to say that, again, I think that this space is so important, but remember that you are more than your biggest mistake or from your like biggest oversight. And every day, like tomorrow has to come. So inevitably you will get past, or you will get through or to whatever that next goal is. Ask for help regularly. And this space of SNMA is like super important. And if I have any like trainees, so residents or fellows on here, thinking about that next step. So we do really good in SNMA of supporting each other, but NMA is that graduated chapter of like how we now support in the same way for physicians of color when we now enter into the workforce. And so really think about plugging into NMA locally, wherever you are, and joining us in Chicago this year, July 19th to 23rd for the NMA conference, if you are a resident who wants to join.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Achalonu.
Yeah, you guys have a good night.
Thank you. You as well.
All right.
Bye.